Hello, and welcome to this version of Presenting Our Presence. Presenting Our Presence is a podcast that amplifies the voices of Indigenous knowledge holders that work at the University of Alberta, and co-hosted by Dr. Janice Cindy Gaudet from Campus Saint Jean and myself, Florence Glanfield, Vice Provost, Indigenous Programming and Research. We're honored today to invite our guest, Michelle Durocher. Michelle has been an active member of the Indigenous Advisory Council since January 2020, and we welcome her into the circle for this version of Presenting Our Presence. Michelle, welcome, and we invite you to introduce yourself in the way that you are most comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you both for the invitation. My name is Michelle Durocher. I'm from the Fishing Lake Métis settlement, and I've worked at the U of A now for almost 12 years, and I've worked in my particular department for almost 8 of those years. So right now I am in the Office of External Relations, and I work mostly with our corporate and our foundation partners to the U of A in their philanthropy. So helping connect us to partners that can provide financial support to programs, research, and awards, sometimes scholarships, that kind of thing. So yeah, very happy to be here and happy to have this conversation with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And I know that previously when we've talked, you've also shared that you are a graduate of the University of Alberta. Could you share that part of the journey with us? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the reminder, Florence. Yes, I graduated in 2008 from Augustana campus. So I wasn't on North Campus to do my degree, but thanks to the combination of Augustana and U of A, I ended up getting a U of A degree. I have a degree in drama and English, but I did it in Camrose, which is a much smaller community, but still, it was an amazing experience. And yeah, happy to be part of the U of A community for many, many years.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. And now I'm going to draw our attention to the background that you have. It is a beautiful background, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how and why you chose the background you did for this interview.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to just move a little bit more to the side here. This is my community. This is Fishing Lake Métis settlement. This is the town site, as we call it, kind of like the center, the hamlet part of the community. But of course, it does extend many, many miles in other directions. This is where I grew up. This is where I was born and raised. I went to that elementary school right there and played in these parks. And yeah, this is home. And it's actually the background I use for my monitors for work as well. It's just, it's nice to see. It's nice to feel a connection to home. I've lived away from home since I was 18 when I moved away for school. So I was very fortunate to see this photo come up that my friend posted and took. His name is Sean Anderson. He's from my community. He was working on a project and had a drone and was able to take this amazing, beautiful photo of our community in the fall, which I think is, yeah, obviously when it's most beautiful, in my opinion, with the colors changing. And so, yeah, I saw that he'd posted this on social media, and I asked, I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I have that photo? Can I use it?" He was like, "Yeah, go ahead, yeah, go for it." I was like, "Cool," because for me, not living at home, but wanting to still feel connected and still like have this like imagery with me always is really wonderful. And I feel like it's like, where's Waldo? Like I see something new in it every day where I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that's, like, I was like, oh, the church. Yeah, the church is in this picture. I didn't realize that before. And oh, that's my cousin's house. Oh, that's my, there's little things where every day I'm like, it's a beautiful community. And I'm just so excited that I get to share it with you guys today.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And there are two pieces in your words that have are going to frame. Maybe I'll have two questions. So we'll start first of all with that notion. You said you've been away since you were 18, and now this photo reminds you, and it's probably, and I'm wondering, is it reminding you of things that might have changed, or you might not have noticed because you were there in a day-to-day way, and now you're looking at your community in a different way because you've been away?
Yeah, so I think that's part of it. Like, the community has grown. There are new buildings, there are new roads. Even since this photo was taken, things have changed. So when I look at it, I can remember those moments of like, oh, when I was growing up, there wasn't a road there. That was like a bike path, that kind of thing, where it's like, and then that just reminds me of growing up there and, being a little settlement kid walking around with my friends, and that's what we did. We just walked around the settlement, just cutting laps. What else were we gonna do? We would like find pathways and and then one day I remember they started like brush cutting, and they were cutting down trees, and I was like, oh, what are they doing? And they're like, oh, they're gonna make a road there. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it's like 16 years old. I'm like, but that was like a little pathway that that was a secret, but like for us was a secret, like now it's a paved road. So I think in that sense, every time I go back, I see something different, but it reminds me of what was there before.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And the other piece that it really, your opening words about the picture pointed me to was the notion of the Métis settlements. Now, I think many people who will be listening to this podcast might not know anything about Métis settlements. And Métis settlements are unique in the province of Alberta. So I'm wondering if you could tell us more about how you understand the story of the Métis settlements.
Sure. So I'm not an expert in these things. I'll start off by saying that. I know what I know from, hearing from my community members, from the adults as I was growing up, and, education on the Métis settlement. So as you mentioned, Florence, these are unique to Alberta. We are the only province, the only place really in Canada and North America that has designated Métis communities that are recognized by the provincial and federal government. There are 8 in Alberta. There used to be 12 when the settlements were first created. I think it was in the early 1930s, there was 12 of them. And then, throughout the years of, some of them were disbanded in some sort of way. I don't really know the history on that, but I know that there are 8 now that exist, Fishing Lake being one of them. Our neighbors to the north, Elizabeth Métis settlement being another. We also have Buffalo Lake, East Prairie, Gift Lake, Kikino, Paddle Prairie, and Peavine. So those are the others. And growing up, we would have youth conferences. So I have visited almost all of our settlements because of that, because we had this wonderful opportunity to attend conferences every summer and every summer a different settlement hosted. So that was a really cool opportunity, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone to Paddle Prairie. It's a very far community, but because we had these amazing opportunities to attend youth conferences with them, it was really good. And then it was also good to know what was happening on other settlements, and how they were different, and how are we the same. I think because it's not that it's an isolated, but you know who you know based on who's closest. So for me, it was Elizabeth Métis Settlement and Frog Lake First Nation, which is also one of our neighbors. So that's kind of how settlements are now. They did start, as I mentioned, in the 1930s. They were established, and then throughout the years, working with the provincial government, we had this federation, Métis Settlement Association, which is now called the Métis Settlements General Council. So that is kind of our governing overall body that kind of represents all 8 Métis settlements. But back then, it was them who were making the calls on where are the settlements going to be, what are they going to be called, how much land do they get, and then how are they going to govern themselves. Like that was a big part of it, is that Métis settlements are self-governed. And while the provincial government did have quite a bit of say in the beginning, by the 1970s, it was like, okay, yep, nope, they are self-governed, and the provincial government does not have as strong a say in what happens on settlement. And then in 1989, we had the Alberta and Métis Settlements Accord, which was the political agreement that the provincial government took into with the settlements, that basically said, like, yeah, okay, this is your land. This is where you're going to be able to have freedom of autonomy, economic self-sufficiency, and you make the calls on settlement. So it took a while. It was 1989 when that finally was put into place, but that's all I've really known. I was just a child when that happened. I remember when we were little, they made a video about, like an educational video about the Métis Settlements Accord. And they came around asking kids, like, hey, do you know what the Accord is? Do you know what the Accord is? And then it was like all these like little kids, like all my like kids that I grew up with, that are like, no, I don't know what that is. No. And then in the end, it was like, here's the adults now to say, oh, like to speak about what the settlement accords meant. And that was like an educational video that they showed us in school, because that like it wasn't something that we would have known otherwise. I think we just, you're in your bubble and you grew up in your community, and the adults take care of that stuff. So it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I was like, I don't even think I understand, like, when was Fishing Lake? Like, when did it become Fishing Lake? Like, that was one of the things I realized that I didn't know growing up, because it was just always there. And so like talking to my dad about, like, when did that happen? And or like even like talking to my sister, who works in my community and works in the administration building of our community, like even like asking her, not that long ago, actually asking her, like, hey, how many people live in Fishing Lake? Because I haven't lived there in so long that I have a rough idea, but like I was like, how many people live there now? And she's like, oh, about 400. I was like, oh, okay. Things that I don't think about because I'm not there 100% of the time. I was like, okay, so there's 400. How many actual members are there? Because I am a member, but I'm a non-residing member. So it's really interesting to try to keep my community connections, but it's not my day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, Now, you know what it also occurred to me, Michelle, thank you for that, first of all. That's so beautiful. I wonder if you could locate Fishing Lake Métis Settlement for our viewers. Um, like we noticed this road going up behind your head and the image. Maybe you could tell us where is the settlement exactly in proximity, and you live and work in this place we now call Edmonton. And where is Fishing Lake in relation to that? Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So Fishing Lake is about 300 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. So we are located actually along the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, very close to the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. So to the north of us is Cold Lake and Bonnyville, those communities. And then to the south of us would be Lloydminster. So those are our closest cities, big towns to our community. So those are kind of the main places where we would go for, groceries, shopping, that kind of stuff. Some of the smaller communities in the area would be St. Paul, Elk Point. Those are some of the smaller towns that are around us. So that's where it is. I hope that kind of helps situate. I guess you have to know Alberta to understand where that is. But yes, we are right along the Alberta and Saskatchewan border.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And of course, when you look at the picture behind you, we can see that it's part of the beautiful boreal forest. I mean, I recognize some of those tree colors in there, and because I too grew up in sort of northeastern Alberta. So thank you. Now I'm going to look at Cindy to see if she has a wonder or question. Cindy?
Thank you, Florence, and thank you, Michelle. So appreciate taking this journey back with you to Fishing Lake, to your community, and also to better understand the Métis settlements, because certainly I grew up in Saskatchewan, and I didn't really know about Métis settlements really till probably only a decade ago. So like Florence was saying, there's probably many of our listeners who are not aware of Métis settlements, and I want to learn more, and I'm always trying to educate myself more, because there's something so important about considering Métis people having almost like this land back and self-governing, right? And what an example for all of us, and an example for this country in terms of what it means to be self-governing, and what does that look like, and it's happening, and really bringing that to the forefront. So thank you for that. And I guess one of my wonder is kind of based on our conversation that we had in preparation for today, was that way in which living our kin, like, we're talking about how even both of us are away from home, this distance from home, yet there's always this connection back and forth regardless of that, and how we live that. And so can you share a little bit about that in terms of your living reality in Edmonton, yet this close connection to community, but kin that's way bigger than just our nuclear family, and what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. So as I mentioned, I left for university when I was 18. So that kind of started the that was my first introduction into not being around my family, my community, right? I moved to Camrose to go to school. And so from that point, it was like, okay, so who am I when I'm not known to everybody, when I'm not just a community member? Like, what else am I? Like, it was building a new identity, I think, to jump into school. It's like, okay, now I'm a student of drama. I am a resident of this floor in these in this residential building. So it's like these new identities as an 18-year-old just fresh off the settlement. And if listeners know, Camrose is not a big place. It is not a big place, but it was big to me. I was like, oh, they have a mall. Oh, they have a theater. Oh, wow, they have a downtown. Like, there was things that I have to take a cab to go places. These are things that were outside of my reality for, my first 18 years growing up. Not knowing everybody, not like, and it's like, okay, so making new friends, what's that like? I've had the same friends my whole life. Like, it was such a unique experience for me from my community, because at that point there hadn't been a lot of people who left my community to go to university, or if they did, they usually sometimes were sticking closer to home, so they could go to Lloydminster and go to a college, which was still going to school, wasn't quite as far away as I'd gone. So Camrose was about a 3-hour drive from home. So that was new for me too. I was like, oh, my family is not just right there, right? So as I, was in that situation a little bit longer, getting more and more comfortable, and visiting home for holidays, visiting home in the summer, that kind of started the whole, okay, who am I now that I'm not a residing member? Like, what am I to this community? And at that point, social media wasn't as big as it is now. I feel like with as many social medias as we have, it's so much easier for me to be connected to my community, because they have a Facebook page, they have a website. So there's these ways that are much easier. For me back then, it was like having to wait to hear about what was going on from my family, for the most part. When I moved to Edmonton in 2009, that also became a new chapter. It was like, okay, so now I'm the family member, or I'm the relative who lives in Edmonton. And that's a whole new set of identities there. Because now it's like, okay, so now you're the one that we can stay with if we come into town. Yes, I'm the one you can stay with. I'm also, I think we've talked about this, Cindy, I'm on call. I'm on call for many things, for visitors, for any emergencies that happened. I mentioned my cousin Samantha went into labor in Edmonton, and nobody else was around. So I got the call of like, hey, Sam is at the Royal Alec and she's gone into labor and someone needs to be with her. It's like, yep, okay, that's me, I'm that someone. So it's this identity, I think, that I take really great pride in. I'm very proud to be this person for my community, for my family. But it's also like, that's not something that happens to everyone, is it? Like, I think of like friends of mine. I have a friend who grew up in Turtleford, Saskatchewan, and I'm like, that would not happen for her. Like, is this specific to First Nations communities where your extension of your relations doesn't get cut once you leave community? For us, it just continues. You're a part of the community, you just don't live there, right? Like, I think when I've talked to her about it, she's like, oh, it's not like people contact her to be like, oh, I'm in town and can you help me with this? Can we stay with you? That doesn't happen for her, but that happens for me. I love it. Like, I love to host my family and I love to help whenever I can. But it's such a unique experience, I think, to be on call, to be saying something like, hey, I'm coming home for the weekend. Does anybody need anything? Like I'm coming from Edmonton. Do you need something? That's just, it's not something I don't think happens with everybody who has left their small town. But for me, it's just kind of how it's always been.
Thank you for that Michelle, and it's true, it's so important, like the distinguishing of those kinship values and systems and how the continuity. I love how you say that even though you're not living there, you're still a member of the community, and there's a new and different role, like we were talking about. I was going to Saskatchewan this week and I was going through my list. Do I call my cousin, pick things up? And I'm negotiating that in my mind in terms of that movement, right? That ability that we move, we're moving from different places, but still that continuity and the difference, and noticing that difference. And when we grow up that way, we don't see that there's a distinguished, until we're in spaces or places or employed where that set of values is not fully understood. And so I know we talked about some of those, living with those tensions within the academy, because when we come with our kin, we come with our value system. And so could you tell us a little bit about how you navigate those moments or those tensions where it's middle of the day and you get the call, you need to go sit with your cousin who maybe is related or not, but it doesn't matter. She's a member of your community. And, and our HR policies kind of are not necessarily considering of the way in which we move through the world as kin. So love to hear about that.
Absolutely. Yes. So that is another thing I had to learn, how to manage, how to navigate. When I started working for the U of A, I was pretty young. I think I was 24. So I was like, I'm here to like start a career. I'm here to be here, and I'm just ready to serve, and ready to be a part of this community. And then realizing very early on, like, there are still things that happen back home that I need to be a part of. And now, how do I explain that to people who don't have the same, who didn't grow up the same way, who don't have the same systems in place, right? So I'll use this for an example. An elder passed away in our community. I was not directly related to this person, but that's a member of my community. And I will be taking the time off of work to attend, to go home, to be with my family and my community and grieve. But I'm like, okay, that's, like you said, Cindy, that's not part of HR. That's not a sanctioned reason to be away from work. That's something that's like, okay, I'm going to have to approach this in a different way, because this is still important to me. It's important to my community. I want to be there. But it's not something I can check a box with HR on. Luckily, I had very understanding supervisors and managers, and who, once I kind of explained, like, yes, it's not someone who I'm directly related to, but I come from a really small town. And so I think that's usually how I framed it, was like, I'm from a really small community where basically everyone is considered family. You don't have to be directly related. You don't have to have the same last name. That's someone that was, I knew since I was a little kid. So that is someone who's still important to me. When there's only 400 people, every single person. And so it's not just a familial loss, it's a community loss. And so we come together. That's just how it always was. And I was very fortunate that I had people who understood that, and were compassionate, and were able to say, like, yeah, you can take the time, and we'll see you when you get back. And so I was super fortunate, but it did have to be a conversation every single time. And so that was also a difference. When I was in university, of course, I had similar things happen where it's like, oh, someone has passed. Okay, I'm going to be away for whatever couple of days. But as a student, I think it was a little bit different. I can just say, like, I'm excusing myself from classes for 2 days, and it wasn't, had no effect on my professors if I was there or not. would make up the work another time if there was something assigned. But being an employee, I think that was where I realized this is different, and I'm going to have to explain myself, my kinships more than I thought I would have to before I joined the university, before I became an employee of the university, right? It wasn't something that I would have to tell my friends. I would have to tell, people, I'm going to be missing school. And there was no questions. It was like, yeah, okay. But it's like, oh, now there's, employee contracts involved and HR involved, and that's a little bit different. But yeah, I think I've been super fortunate that while I do have to explain every time that this is going to happen, I've had people be very understanding about it. But yeah, it's got to be a conversation every single time, and I'm just used to that at this point, I think.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And I know that Kyle also has a question or a wonder for you. So Kyle, I invite you to share your wonder and curiosity with Michelle.
Merci. Thank you so much, Florence. And Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your experiences here. I'm particularly drawn to you having, the background of Fishing Lake, a picture of Fishing Lake as your background, because, for so many of us, we are away from our home communities to either attend or work or participate in the culture of the University of Alberta. And so I'm just curious, in a way that pulls the thread here and perhaps kind of ties it all together, if you might have any advice to any prospective students or even prospective faculty members. I know there are some wonderful Indigenous brilliant individuals out there who are perhaps considering the University of Alberta as a place of work. So I'm just considering, just really curious what advice you'd have for them, or around that notion of staying connected while you're away, and what your experience has been like there.
Thanks, Kyle. So I've been super fortunate in the last couple of years to be introduced to Florence's office. So before it was Florence, it was Shayna, Dion, and Chris Henderson, and Micah. And so for me, that was my first introduction into having connections to people, to other First Nations people. And it was like a relief. It was a breath of fresh air to be like, oh, here's a group of people that aren't necessarily from my community, but will have similar experiences to me of being a First Nations person, being specifically me, a Métis person who doesn't live in my community anymore. We were so fortunate that Florence's office was created because that brought so many of us together that didn't know who else was on campus. I always knew there was the Faculty of Native Studies. I knew a super amazing community of First Nations people, but I didn't work for them. So, it was always like, well, I know they exist, I know they're there, but it's not like I'm going to work with those people all the time or see them all the time or have these opportunities to say hello or to chat. And then when Florence's office was created, that became the gathering point, right? We had these amazing people suddenly reaching out and finding these strings and pulling you in and saying, hey, we're all here. Like, come hang out with us. Like we had this, I remember we had a staff lunch one day, and it said on the invite, like, oh, like, come have lunch with us. Maybe you'll meet a cousin. And it was like, playful and cute. But I went and I met my cousin's wife. So it does happen. That's exactly, I was like, I met a cousin. There we go. So I think now that is kind of the advice that I would give to people who are coming to the university, is just get involved in Florence's office, get on the mailing lists, come to the teas, because we're here, right? When we're here to support each other, we listen, we chat, we laugh, and we're not from the same place, but we have a lot of the same experiences, and I'm just so grateful for that.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful reminder, Michelle. And thank you for reminding us of the good work, that the Indigenous Initiatives team did with Chris, Shayna, Mika. They laid foundations for the work that we can currently do, so that when we hit the pandemic, it was the first year into my role, and we could imagine gathering virtually. Right? How do we move from the in-present gatherings or in face-to-face gatherings to the virtual and maintain a community? So I really appreciate that wisdom, and thank you. So I am going to say, Michelle, we're honored by the teachings and the wisdom and the experiences that you've had and shared with us and our audience today. I want to thank you. You are a gift to our community. You participate, and we feel connected. And the reminder of come and meet a cousin. Yeah, and the cousin and the kin in all of the ways that we know kinship as Indigenous people who work at the University of Alberta. So grateful for our time together. Michelle, Cindy, Kyle, thank you, and with much gratitude.